My mother handed me a crumpled $2 lottery ticket in front of 30 people and told me it was probably more appropriate for me. The room laughed. My sister was holding a $13,000 cruise voucher in a gold envelope. I smiled, said thank you, and put that ticket in my purse like it didn't matter. I had no idea I was holding $100 million in my hand. Welcome back to the Family Revenge Tales. My name is Ellison. I'm 33 years old and I design gardens for a living. Not flower beds, real landscapes, the kind that take a barren lot and turn it into something that breathes. I built that business myself, from nothing, over 8 years of missed holidays and unpaid invoices, and clients who didn't take a woman with dirt under her fingernails seriously until they saw the finished work. I never asked my parents for a dime. I think that's exactly why they stopped seeing me at all. My sister, Sloane, is 2 years younger than me, and for as long as I can remember, she has been the sun our family orbited. When she got engaged to Grant Holloway, a real estate consultant with a watch that cost more than my car, my parents threw an engagement party that took over an entire country club ballroom. When I got my landscape architecture license, my mother sent a text that said, "That's nice, honey," and asked if I could bring a salad to Sunday dinner. I used to think it was because Sloane needed more. She was fragile in a way I wasn't. She cried easily, she needed reassurance, and my parents, especially my mother Janice, always rushed in to give it to her. I told myself that my quietness, my independence, was its own kind of privilege. I didn't need to be propped up. I could stand on my own. I was wrong about a lot of things that Thanksgiving taught me. The dinner was at my parents' house in Franklin, Tennessee, the same dining room I'd eaten in since I was a child, the same chandelier my father was always threatening to replace. Nearly 30 of us crowded around 3 tables pushed together. Aunts and cousins and second cousins, the smell of my mother's cornbread stuffing thick in the air. My father, Richard, stood at the head of the table and cleared his throat the way he always did before an announcement, and I remember feeling a small, stupid flicker of hope that maybe this year something nice was coming my way too. "We wanted to do something special," he said, looking at Sloane and Grant, "to celebrate 5 years of marriage and everything you two have built." My mother produced a gold envelope with a bow on it and set it in front of Sloane like she was presenting a trophy. Sloane opened it, gasped, and held up a voucher. A Caribbean cruise, $13,500, an ocean view suite. The whole family found out the price because my father said it out loud, twice, like it needed repeating to be believed. Everyone clapped. My Aunt Darlene whooped. Grant kissed Sloane's hand and said something about how she deserved the world. And for a moment, I actually meant it when I smiled. Then my mother turned to me. She had something in her hand, too. A small piece of paper, folded and a little soft at the creases, like it had been sitting in the bottom of her purse for a while. She held it out to me with the same smile she used when she was trying not to laugh at her own joke. "This is probably more appropriate for you," she said. It was a $2 lottery ticket. The table laughed. Not everyone, but enough. My uncle chuckled into his napkin. Sloane bit her lip, trying not to smile. I looked down at that little strip of paper in my mother's hand, and for one long second, the whole room seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what I would do with my humiliation. So, I did the only thing I know how to do. I took it. I said, "Thanks, Mom," in a voice that didn't shake, and I slid it into my purse like it was nothing, because giving them my hurt would have just been one more thing I handed over for free. I want to tell you I forgot about that ticket for the rest of the night. I didn't. But something else happened before I left that house that stayed with me even longer. My grandmother Evelyn found me in the kitchen while I was helping clear plates. She's 81, sharp as a blade, the only person in my family who ever looked at me like I was already enough. She took my wrist with a grip that surprised me and pulled me gently into the pantry, out of earshot. "I need you to call someone, Nathan Brooks. He's my attorney. Write his number down now before you forget." "Grandma, what's going on?" "Just call him." Her eyes were steady, but there was something underneath them I hadn't seen before. Fear, maybe, or the exhaustion of carrying something alone for too long. "And Mara, don't tell your father we spoke." I laughed because it sounded absurd. Why would I not tell Dad? She didn't laugh back. "Just do this for me," she said, and squeezed my hand once before walking back into the noise of the dining room like nothing had happened. I didn't understand it that night. I understood it 4 days later, when I was helping my parents pack up leftover folding chairs, and I found a folder of papers on my father's desk that had slipped halfway out of a drawer he'd forgotten to close. I wasn't snooping, I was moving a lamp. But once I saw Grandma Evelyn's name printed at the top of a document titled Lien Notice, I couldn't make myself look away. My father was in debt. Deep debt. The kind with numbers I had to read twice. And the loan hadn't come from a bank. It had come from Grant. My sister's husband, the man with the country club watch, had personally loaned my father a significant sum of money at an interest rate that made my stomach turn. And as collateral, somehow, impossibly, my grandmother's house had been placed at risk. The same house I'd spent every summer of my childhood in, with the wraparound porch and the rose garden she let me help her prune when I was 7 years old. I sat on the floor of my father's office for a long time. I thought about all the years I'd told myself the favoritism in my family was about affection, about who needed comfort more. Sitting there with that folder in my lap, I understood, maybe for the first time, that it might have never been about love at all. It might have been about who was watching closely enough to notice what was really going on. I didn't confront anyone, not yet. I went home instead, and that night, half out of habit and half out of some feeling I couldn't name, I pulled that crumpled $2 ticket out of my purse and set it on my kitchen counter. I almost threw it away. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the Mega Millions results, mostly as a joke to myself, a small private moment of irony before bed. The first number matched. I told myself it was coincidence. The second number matched. My hands started to feel strange, distant, like they belonged to someone else. The third, the fourth, the fifth. Then the last number, the one that made the whole thing real, matched too. I checked it 3 more times that night. I called the state lottery hotline the next morning with a voice that didn't sound like mine. $100 million. The ticket my mother had handed me like a punchline was the biggest jackpot our state had seen in years. I didn't scream. I didn't call my parents. I didn't post anything online or start looking at houses. I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee going cold, and I thought about my grandmother's hand around my wrist, telling me not to tell my father. I thought about that lien on her house, and I picked up the phone and called Nathan Brooks. Nathan turned out to be a careful, quiet man in his 60s who had handled my grandmother's affairs for over 20 years. When I told him who I was, there was a pause on the line, and then he said, "I've been hoping you'd call." What he told me changed everything I thought I understood about my family. Years earlier, my grandmother had quietly established a private trust with me named as the sole beneficiary. She'd done it, Nathan said, because she was afraid of what might happen to her estate if my parents were left in full control of it. She had been watching me long before that Thanksgiving. She had been protecting me in ways I never knew about. But then his voice changed, and he told me the harder part. The lien on her house wasn't just a bad loan decision. There were documents showing my grandmother had signed away certain property rights during a hospital stay 8 months earlier, a stretch of time when she'd been heavily medicated after a fall. Nathan believed, and the paperwork suggested, that she hadn't fully understood what she was signing. Someone had taken advantage of a woman recovering in a hospital bed. I asked him who had been in the room with her. He didn't have to answer. I already knew. I went to see my Aunt Darlene after that, because Darlene has never been able to keep a secret for very long, and because I suspected she was tired of carrying this one. We sat in her sunroom with tea neither of us drank, and she finally let it out like a held breath. "Grant isn't just a real estate consultant," she said. "He's been lending money privately to people who are desperate. Your father isn't the only one." She looked at her hands. "And, Mara, there's something else. He's been seeing his assistant, Kelsey, for months. I think he's already planning his way out of that marriage." I sat with that for a long moment, and something shifted in me. I had spent years believing my sister was simply the golden child, coddled and blind to how the rest of us were treated. But sitting in Darlene's sunroom, I understood that Sloane might be standing in the wreckage of the same kind of quiet cruelty I'd survived. She just hadn't found the wreckage yet. I could have exposed everything that week. I had the money and the evidence to make my family's world collapse in a single afternoon. I thought about it, I won't pretend I didn't, but revenge that fast would have been about my anger, not about the truth. So instead, I secured my winnings properly, worked with Nathan to challenge the fraudulent property documents, and started collecting every piece of evidence I could find. Not to humiliate my family, but because I needed the truth to be undeniable before I ever said a word. Sloane and Grant left for the cruise a week later, waving from a photo my mother posted with the caption, "So proud of our girl." My family assumed I was at home, quietly stewing over a $2 consolation prize. They had no idea what I was building behind the scenes. Then, the local news ran a story. Someone in the Franklin area had won the Mega Millions jackpot, $100 million. My mother, apparently, put it together within the hour. I found out later she sat straight up at her kitchen table and said out loud, 2-1, "The ticket." The calls started that same evening. My mother, suddenly warm in a way she hadn't been in years, asking how I was doing, telling me she'd been thinking about me. My father wanting to talk about family, a phrase he had never once used with me before. Sloane texting from the ship, hearts and exclamation points. Grant, of all people, offering to help me with financial planning, as though I hadn't just learned exactly what kind of financial planning he specialized in. I understood immediately what was happening. They weren't calling because they missed me. They were calling because they were afraid of what I might have and hungry for what they thought I might give them. For the first time in my life, I saw the shape of their love laid out clearly, and I saw exactly how much of it had a price tag attached. So I decided to tell them the truth, but on my terms. I set up a video call for when they'd all be together. My parents, Sloane, and Grant, still on the ship, gathered around a laptop in their suite with excitement written all over their faces. They expected a celebration. I could see it in the way my mother had done her hair, the way my father kept grinning at the camera like a man already counting money that wasn't his. "Yes," I told them when they asked, "I won $100 million. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then everyone spoke at once. My mother pressed her chest and said she always knew I was special. My father asked if we could set up a family meeting to talk strategy. Sloane said maybe now we could finally be closer, the way sisters are supposed to be. Grant leaned toward the camera with a smile I now understood far too well and said he'd love to help me structure things properly. I let them finish. Then I shared my screen. I showed them my father's loan documents first, the real numbers, out loud, in front of everyone. Then Grant's lending agreement, the interest rate that had put my father in that hole in the first place. Then the lien on Grandma Evelyn's house. Then the medical record showing she'd been sedated and disoriented when she signed away her rights. And finally, quietly, without any satisfaction in my voice at all, I told them about Kelsey. Sloane's face changed in a way I will never forget. She turned to Grant on that small screen, and I watched 5 years of marriage crack open in real time. He started to deny it, stammering something about context, but the documents were already there, time-stamped, undeniable. My father was the one who spoke first, once the shock passed. "Mara, please, we're family, help us." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Then you should have treated me like your daughter," I said, "before you found out I was worth $100 million. I told them exactly what I would do. I would protect my grandmother. I would resolve the legitimate parts of the debt tied to her home because that house mattered more to me than any grudge I could hold. But I would not fund a cover-up. I would not protect Grant. I would not rescue a life built on lies just because the people living it shared my last name. After the call ended, I didn't have to do anything else. The truth did the rest of the work on its own. Sloane confronted Grant the moment they docked. Kelsey, it turned out, had her own evidence and her own reasons to come forward once Sloane reached out to her directly. The divorce began within weeks. Complaints about Grant's lending practices found their way to people who take that sort of thing seriously. My father's finances, no longer protected by silence, became impossible to hide from anyone. I didn't destroy my family. I simply stopped standing between them and the consequences of what they'd already done. The best part of everything that happened next had nothing to do with money at all. I used part of my winnings to clear the fraudulent lien and secure my grandmother's house permanently in her name, no strings, no conditions. Then I had it renovated, a ramp for her bad knee, better lighting, a caretaker for the mornings when her hip acts up. And I brought her rose garden, the one we used to tend together when I was small, back to life. When she came home and walked through it for the first time, she stood very still in the doorway for a long moment. Then she looked at me and said, "You didn't buy my house back, Mara." I didn't understand what she meant. She smiled, took my hand the way she had that Thanksgiving night, and said, "You gave it back to me." That sentence has stayed with me longer than any number in my bank account ever will. Months later, a letter came from Sloane. Handwritten, no return address needed because I already knew that handwriting from a lifetime of birthday cards. She admitted things in that letter I never expected to hear. She knew she'd been treated differently. She knew I'd been overlooked. She had liked being the favorite, and admitting the truth of it would have meant admitting her whole life wasn't the fairy tale she'd built it up to be, even to herself. She didn't ask for money. She didn't even ask for forgiveness, not directly. She just said she was sorry, plainly, the way people rarely manage to be. We met for coffee a few weeks after that. It was awkward. There were long silences, neither of us filled with the old jokes we used to hide behind. But it was honest. Maybe the most honest conversation we'd ever had. And for the first time, we weren't performing the roles our parents had written for us since we were children. It's been a year now. My landscape business has grown more than I ever imagined. I bought a modest house, nothing extravagant, with a garden I designed myself and a rescue dog who follows me from room to room like he still can't believe his luck. I started a foundation that gives scholarships to young women pursuing design and environmental work, girls who remind me a little of myself at 22, quiet and underestimated and hungry to build something with their own two hands. The money gave me freedom, but it didn't give me my worth. I already had that. I just needed the space to stop living by everyone else's definition of it. Looking back, I've come to believe the real miracle was never the $100 million. It was what that little ticket revealed. My family only started to see me the moment they thought I had something they wanted. My grandmother saw me long before that, when I had nothing but muddy boots and a stubborn streak. And in the end, I learned to see myself, too, without needing anyone's permission to do it. They thought they were putting me in my place that night at the table. They had no idea they were handing me the first step toward a life I would build entirely on my own terms. If this story meant something to you, if any part of it reminded you of your own family, your own quiet years of being overlooked, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the Family Revenge Tales. This channel exists for everyone who has ever sat at a table and smiled through being made small, and who still believes that quiet strength eventually gets its due. You don't need $100 million to walk away from people who make you feel like less than you are. You don't need anyone's approval to know your own worth. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't tearing someone down. It's building a life so full and so peaceful that you no longer need them to understand what they lost. This story carries a lesson worth sitting with long after the screen goes dark. Real love within a family should never be conditional, and worth should never be measured by what a person can provide. Mara's story shows the quiet damage that favoritism does over years, how it teaches one child they are lesser and another that love must be earned through performance, and how both wounds can fracture a family long before any secret comes to light. It also shows the importance of protecting vulnerable relatives, like Grandma Evelyn, from those who might exploit their trust or their health for financial gain, and the value of paying close attention to elderly family members whose voices are too often dismissed. Perhaps most importantly, this story teaches that justice does not require cruelty. Mara never sets out to humiliate the people who hurt her. She simply stops shielding them from the truth of their own choices and lets honesty do what anger never could. That distinction between revenge and accountability is often the difference between a family that heals and one that shatters for good.